Welcome to the Tips and Tricks webinar sponsored by the Association of American Law Schools. My name is Shawn Scott, and I am a faculty member at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, and I will be hosting today's webinar. For anybody who is interested in becoming a law professor, one of the first steps in the hiring process is having an initial screening interview with a law school. And this is true whether the position is a doctrinal one for as a clinical faculty member, or for a legal writing faculty member. So today we have assembled a group of faculty who will offer some advice about navigating the initial interview. The presenters have been involved in the hiring process either on one end or the other, and today they're really here to offer us general information and not specific information about opportunities that may currently exist at their home institutions. So each of the presenters will introduce themselves and speak for a few moments. And after everybody has spoken, we will open up the floor to your questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Marci Straus.
So hello, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar. I teach at Loyola Law School in the areas of criminal procedure and the First Amendment, and I've been on the appointments committee for approximately 10 years, including this year. And based on that experience, I offer the following 3 pieces of advice. First, show interest in and knowledge of the particular school you're interviewing with. Why should you do this? Why does it matter? First, it demonstrates your maturity and willingness to do the necessary homework to succeed. Something, of course, any potential employer looks for in an applicant. But I think it's especially important for a teaching position because the essence of teaching is really always doing your homework and always learning. After all, most of us are going to end up teaching a course that we may have only taken one course in. We don't have PhDs in the subject, maybe practiced in, but constant homework and preparation will be the keystone. So knowing that you are a person who will do what's necessary to succeed is something we're looking for. Second, and perhaps more important, it's something schools rely on in making callback decisions, seeing that you are interested in and knowledgeable about the school. Many schools have limited resources. They can only call back a set number of applicants to the school for a full-day interview. Thus, in deciding who to call back, they not only consider who has the greatest resume or who shined in the interview, they also make a calculation as to whether you're likely to come to the school if given an offer. This means that a top-flight candidate may not get a callback, a full-day callback, because the committee decided that they would be a wasted slot, that such a candidate has no real interest in coming to the school or the city that the school is located in. The schools aren't looking for a promise that you'd accept an offer if extended, of course, but they do want some assurance that you would honestly consider them. So how do you show that interest and knowledge of the school? Obviously, you could tell them. You can work into the interview why you particularly value the school or location, like I have a sibling in LA, I love the city, I appreciate Loyola's social justice mission, or something like that. Here are some other suggestions that may be even more meaningful. First, do your research. Look up and research the particular committee members ahead of time so you can make some connection. You may have shared clerkships, you may have shared work experiences. Check into the committee members. Most schools will tell you who you will be meeting with. Get that information, perhaps you can make some research connection. I loved your article on the subject, you could say, when being introduced to them. Second, research the school. Ask friends about the school. Look up the website, and that will allow you to ask questions specific to the school. Most schools leave time for questions. Don't use that time for generic questions. Ask specific questions that show your interest in the school. For example, you may notice that the school has a particular expertise or has mostly students, first-generation college students. How does that affect your teaching? You may ask the school. Ask school-specific questions if you can. Finally, follow up the interview with thank you notes or emails. And if you can, in those emails, include a comment about something said during the interview, which again shows that you are a thoughtful person in the interview, that interview meant something to you. So for example, in the email, you may say something like, I thought more about X's question concerning this, And here's a more thoughtful answer than I was able to provide during the interview. So that's my first suggestion. Second suggestion, be energetic during the interview. Show your passion. Why does this matter? Remember, you're interviewing for a teaching job. And however imperfect, most interviewers use the 30-minute interview session to assess how effective you may be in the classroom and how you'd be as a colleague. So how do you do this? One is to get psyched before each interview. It's an exhausting process. Go in realizing that. But as much as you can, psych yourself up before each 30-minute segment. One other suggestion may be to have strategic scheduling, have certain breaks scheduled in, especially before an interview that you're particularly excited about. Third, remember that it's not just what you say, but how you say it. Eye contact, tone of voice, projection. Again, they're looking to see how you'll be in a classroom. If you are very understated in the interview, they may worry about how you may project in a large classroom. Show you can listen and be responsive to questions and not defensive. Again, traits that will really serve you well in a classroom if you are open to questions and not defensive about them. Demonstrate excitement about teaching. That's hopefully authentic, is a useful trait to have or something to demonstrate during this interview session. So that's my second suggestion. Third, be prepared to discuss all your scholarship. The scholarship discussion that will take place in virtually every interview has several purposes. A committee wants to see how you explain your scholarship, which goes far towards showing them how you would be as a teacher. Second, they want to see your scholarship chops, how you defend your ideas, how you explore your ideas. And third, they want to make sure that you're excited about and likely to produce future scholarship. So they'd be interested in your scholarship agenda and your general attitude towards scholarship. So what do you do to prepare for these goals and to achieve these goals during the interview? One is to read all your scholarship. You likely will be only questioned about your job talk, but you need to be prepared for a discussion about any of your scholarship. You may have written something in law school that really excites one of the faculty members who are interviewing you, and that may be where they steer the conversation. You gotta be prepared for that. Second, have the right attitude. You don't have to be pretend to be a polished scholar. We know you're entering the profession. So be open to ideas that you haven't thought about. Don't be defensive or feel you need to have all the answers. You can be humble and willing to admit you hadn't thought of something. And again, you might want to follow through when you have a chance to think about it. And then finally, engage in it as a conversation. Don't dodge questions. Feel free to engage the questioner and ask them perhaps how they might explore something that you're having some difficulty in exploring yourself. So those are my suggestions. I wish you good luck and look forward to discussing some of the issues with you during the question and answer.
Thank you, Professor Strauss. Much appreciated. Next up is Professor Dorfman. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Doron Dorfman. I'm an associate professor of law at Syracuse University College of Law, where I teach health law, employment discrimination, torts, and disability law. I went to the market last year, and I'm excited to share a few tips on hopefully a successful journey through the market. My first suggestion is really to practice your interviewing skills with your friends, with your colleagues, with your mentors. Hopefully you'll do it more than once. And once you practice your interview, collect questions about your research and about your teaching and prepare model answers to those questions. The reason I say that is because most of the questions are kind of repeat themselves throughout the interviews. For example, I conduct empirical research, and many of the questions about my methodology and the policy implications repeated themselves throughout the interviews that I had in AALS. After you collect those questions and create those model answers, I suggest that you study those as you come closer to AALS. But a word of warning about that. You don't want to sound too mechanical. You don't want to sound too rehearsed when answering your questions. But I think this would give you some confidence in yourself, and it will also be helpful to you throughout the interview process itself. My second advice to you is that if you tend to talk really fast, practice about talking slower. And I know this might not or seem intuitive to some of you, but it's actually, you'll be surprised by how you sound to others, especially to people who meet you for the first time. So I really suggest not only to practice the substantive issues in the interview, but also the way you project yourself. My third and final tip is for the LLS fair itself. So when you arrive, the evening before your interviews, I suggest that you take a walk through the hotel. It's a really big venue. It's a really big hotel, and it's very spread out. So I suggest that you take a tour the night before and check out the rooms that you'll be interviewed in, just to relieve anxiety at the day of the interview when you'll be running around from one room to another. I think that will help relieve some of the stress. A final tip that is not on the PowerPoint, but I just wanted to share with you, is to have a job market buddy. Hopefully you'll be buddies after the job market as well. And I actually had the fortune to meet some people on the job market and to become friends with them. But having someone you can share the stress throughout the process, and even at AALS itself, is really valuable. And I hope that you will find someone like that. These are my tips. I wish you the best of luck, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Professor Donahue, your turn.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. So my name is Claire Donohue. I'm the Director of Interdisciplinary Practice here at Boston College Law School, and I'm an assistant clinical professor. I've taught ethics in the past, and I also teach family law. Prior to this, I had a fellowship at GW and then also a term limited contract as a practitioner in residence at American University. I mention that because those are the different sort of entry points and different screenings you might find yourself in as a clinician. So my 3 points of advice are as follows. The first, in keeping with some of the advice you've already heard, is to do your homework. And what I mean by this is to consider who's screening you. As a clinician, your screening interview might be exclusively with clinical faculty. It might include some doctrinal faculty, or they're exclusively doctrinal, or it might have both. How you describe yourself, your pedagogy, your docket will be slightly different depending on the audience you're talking to. In my experience, there's sort of a certain shorthand that might be available between clinicians that's not necessarily available when you're in a mixed audience. But even amongst clinicians, I think it's worth looking at what type of clinic they run and to be thoughtful about how your expectations about what's common or ordinary in a clinic may not hold true depending on certain aspects of clinic design at the school with whom you're interviewing. My second piece of advice is to be curious. And what I mean by this is to be curious about the institution, to do a little homework there specifically. What are their goals and their priorities? So when in the interview you're asked if you have any questions, one way to approach that question is to ask questions that are in service of your own immediate needs, maybe about summer funding or about access to a research assistant. But it would be my advice not to necessarily get into those weeds at this point, but instead to use that as an opportunity to turn the lens around a little bit onto the institution. One, because you yourself are in a process of trying to learn in this interview about who you're dealing with. But the other is because for the simple and sort of human tendency that people like to talk about themselves. And so it gives the interviewers an opportunity to speak about what they know well, which is their own institution. So here you might consider, has the school recently raised in the ranks? Why? What are you doing right? What are you most proud of? Are there any particular challenges or joys in teaching to your student population, in living in your area? Are there strategic initiatives, perhaps, that you've come across that happen to be the case here at Boston College, strategic initiatives that your position dovetail with, and to maybe gauge some of your questions towards that. And the third piece of advice might sound silly, but I offer it very genuinely, which is to try, even if you are faking it till you make it at certain points, to enjoy yourself. So in this early stage, a lot of what interviewers are asking, and you heard this with Professor Straus's comments, bound up in her comments, is this person going to be a fit with our faculty? Are they going to be curious? Are they going to be engaging? So there's not necessarily enough time to pitch the most thorough clinic design. There might not necessarily be enough time to have everybody understand the full, nuance of your brilliant scholarship, but there probably is enough time to just appear energetic and engaged, an amiable colleague, which will help them remember you from the groups that they've been screening, and hopefully keep you in their mind as they're thinking about who to fly out. So I'll wait for further comments for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Donahue. And our final presenter is Professor Ray.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I also went on the market just last fall, and so the experience is pretty fresh in my mind. And I'm excited to have a chance to talk a little bit about a few tips and tricks that I think could be useful. So I teach at the University of Alabama School of Law, and I teach professional responsibility and immigration law, and I've also in the past taught legislation and regulation, which is a required first-year class at some schools, including at Alabama. So my tips and tricks relate to the screening interviews, but also extend beyond a little bit. So my first one has to do with your job talk. And some of you may be finalizing your job talk papers. I know some folks were maybe caught off guard by the job talk being part of the FAR form this year. But by the time you get to your screening interviews, you'll have the draft that you're ready to talk about. And I think it's really important to practice talking about your job talk. You can practice with, if you're in a fellowship or VAP where your colleagues are supporting your job market process, then certainly lean on them and they'll be happy to practice with you. You can also, though, widen your network, and if you're not in a fellowship or VAP or don't otherwise have access to colleagues who can assist you in that way, lean on your law school classmates, friends. I had my co-clerk listen to my job talk, but for screening interview purposes, it's useful to even have someone listen to your 30-second version, your 1-minute version, your 2-minute version, that kind of thing. And just practice as much as you can, is what I would say. I also think it's important, to think carefully about sort of how you got to this point of being on the market for an academic position. For some of you, it will be really straightforward. For others, it could be that you worked for a long time or you taught, in a different capacity. I was a lecturer for a long time before I went on the market. And just being able to answer questions about your biography, if there's anything, that seems unusual. And I think, if there are personal reasons that led you to make certain decisions, you can certainly bring that up without explaining too much. And I think that can help give coherence to your story. And then finally, this echoes much of, I think, what we've already heard, but I would advise you to learn as much as you can about the needs and culture of the schools with which you are interviewing. And so, you're there in the room with the appointments committee because they are looking for someone who's going to be a colleague and a great scholar and teacher and someone who's going to invest in the institution. Often they're also looking for someone to cover a specific class. And so being aware of that, why are you in the room? Is it because you put evidence on your list, or is it because they're looking for civil procedure? I mean, those are the things that in the heat of the moment, you don't want to lose sight of. You want to be aware of sort of why they're talking to you, at some level. And so you'll probably be asked to discuss your ideal teaching package. And, if you can honestly include, the courses for which they are interviewing you, that helps, obviously, if they're looking for evidence and you can have that in your response, that creates much more of an impression that it's a match. So just give some thought about sort of practically how to incorporate the school's curricular needs into your answers in the interview. And then I think a lot of great things have been said about researching the schools that you're interviewing with, especially, the culture and kind of the path of the school, if there are any big changes of late. So I think that that's already kind of on your radar.
Okay, thank you all so much. I would like to open it up now to questions that folks in the audience may have. But as you're gathering your thoughts, there are a couple of things that I would like to ask our presenters to think about and perhaps respond to. The first one involves the question of whether to attend the faculty recruitment conference sponsored by the AALS in October if you don't have any interviews. Now, I should note that schools conduct interviews on campus. Sometimes they conduct interviews virtually, but I think the majority of screening interviews for doctrinal faculty happen at the faculty recruitment conference in October. And this is a question that we that AALS gets asked frequently, and so I'd like to start off with getting some responses from our presenters about how they would answer that question.
So I'll jump in. It's Marci Straus. My gut level reaction would be to say that you should not come to the job fair for a number, come to the AALS for a number of reasons. And the first is that it is not a job fair. The teaching market and the interview process here is very unique from other employment situations. It is not a situation where you have, where people are sitting around and you can interact with them regularly. From the appointments committee perspective, as a member of an appointments committee, we are sitting in a room for 2 days, and virtually every half hour someone new is circulating in. We don't have the option to discuss and to meet with people who aren't on our list. Of course, we occasionally venture out for, to grab a meal here and there, and obviously we have moments where we're rushing from our hotel room to our meeting room, but that's about it. So you won't have the opportunity really, in most cases, to interact with faculty members. And, to be honest, the other reason is if you don't have interviews scheduled when you are there, what you will see is a lot of people with interview scheduled running around and meeting with these schools. And it can be a little disheartening to be in that situation. The only argument on the other side is that there are a few meet and greet opportunities scheduled by the AALS. So if you live in DC, if you are near DC, if you understand all the pitfalls and decide you want to go anyways because you have a few people and that plan on grabbing a meal with you, if there's those special reasons, then perhaps you should go. But the key is to recognize that it is not a job fair and that there's very little opportunity to interact with members of different schools during those 2 days.
Thank you very much, Professor Strauss. As somebody who has been involved in hiring as well, I would echo your comments. And also note that the legal writing section of AALS does encourage people to come to their reception just to talk about legal writing and what it entails. So that would be the one exception in terms of kind of extending an open invitation for people who don't have interviews to come and meet with them. Any other presenters, or should we turn to, I see some questions have come in. Any other comments to add to that? Okay, so I will ask the AALS staff if they can send some questions our way.
Yeah, so this is Keely. I work for the AALS, and we did get some questions in the chat, and I'm just going to read it out loud to the group. The first question is from Krista Laser. Can you tell us more about the logistics of screening interviews? When do schools usually call? Do they typically want a copy of the job talk paper before the screening interview? It's a multi-part question. How many candidates are typically screened versus brought in for callbacks?
So let's take them one at a time. So let's go back to the very first one.
Can you tell us more about the logistics of screening interviews? When do schools usually call?
So I can speak to that a little bit. This is Marci Straus again. We typically, there'll be calls up until the date of the AALS convention, meat market, as we probably can refer to it. The FAR forms have gone out. Schools are definitely starting to call back people, but there could be calls and openings that arise close to the end part. So I would say by the end of September, you should have heard from a school. And some schools will bring you in for local interviews if you happen to be in the area, and those could really happen anytime. They could even happen after the meat market. We do ours before that so that we're all done by the time of the AALS meeting in the first week of October.
So I would add to that because the first FAR forms have already gone out, when I was chairing our hiring committee, we would meet as soon as we got the forms, and I would start calling people the week after. So I would start calling people or emailing or contacting people certainly by the third week of August. And as Professor Strauss points out, we would be calling people all the way through this year, the conferences the first week of October. We would be calling people pretty close to that deadline if we had not already filled our dance card.
One thing I can say, I remember part of the question was, what is the screening interview like? And it typically, for most schools, involves the areas that you'll be involved with as a teacher. So they will ask you about your teaching interests, like perhaps a question on who was your teacher, who was a professor of yours that you would emulate, your teaching style, your teaching experience. Many schools spend the majority of time on scholarship, which, as we talked before, most of the time involves your job talk. And as I believe it was Professor Ray mentioned, you should have a 30-second version and a 2-minute version and 4-minute version, longer version, where you may not be asked questions at first. You may be asked to explain your paper, and thus that should be really prepared on your behalf. And then finally, they'll often leave room for questions or a time. Well, they'll probably first also have a time where they try to sell themselves, a few minutes where they tell you what's great about their school. That's time for you to sit back, relax, and just listen and hopefully take notes. And then finally, as we mentioned, there'll be often a time for questions, and that will that's the time, as many of us talk about, for you to show your knowledge of and interest in the school, rather than have generic questions like, do you give research grants? The thing I want to mention is it goes by very fast. The half hour zooms by. You'd be amazed how quickly it goes. Also, I want to echo Professor Dorfman's comments about how important it is to know where you're going. We always have people who come to the session late. Some schools hold them over late from their previous interview, but some interviewees get lost. So it's really important to have done that walk through the hotel. It's not intuitive where the rooms are, and it's, if you could possibly schedule things, know where things are located even in advance, and give yourself breaks and so forth, it would be really helpful for getting to your interviews on time.
If I may add something really quick, another thing that I think is important to mention in the interview, in addition to what Professor Strauss just mentioned, is your trajectory as a scholar and where you think your research and scholarship is going after your job talk as well. So yes, you need to be prepared to talk about your job talk, as Professor Ray and Professor Strauss mentioned, but I was asked many times, what do you think about, where do you think your scholarship is going from here on out? And you need to talk about it in, the specificity of it can change and can differ from a person to a person, but people want to know that you have good ideas for the future, that you have some knowledge of your field, and you know what's, might be the next best idea for an article. So think about that too.
So if we could go on to the next question, because I see that the queue is getting long. I will note that we have recorded a mock screening interview. And so that's going to be added to the materials on the website, I hope within the next 2 weeks. So you can actually experience what that brief 30 minutes will be like. Okay, Keely, our next question.
Could you talk about how and whether to signal that you have a faculty spouse in a different department who is also seeking a position too?
I'll say something about that. It's a really hard issue, and I got a lot of different kinds of advice. That was my situation. And the advice I got was basically don't mention it until you're a little bit further along in the process. And so I don't think it's something that's really relevant at the stage of the screening interview. I think schools appreciate finding out in time so that they could accommodate something, right? Or come up with a creative solution if need be. So there's a tension that for which I don't think there's a universally right answer. The school's need for time, right? If they are interested in you to come up with something, and then your need to at least be able to progress in the process without perhaps having this extra baggage of there being a second person who's looking for a job. So I don't think it's prudent to raise it in the screening interview unless, comes up sort of organically. Possibly at a flyout, or definitely, at the stage of an offer. Of course, at that point, it becomes imperative that they know. That's just my take on it.
Mm-hmm. Other people want to chime in? I agree with Professor Ray. All right, Keely.
The next question is, I'm wondering how the interview process works at the very beginning. Do schools usually reach out to candidates they're interested in, or is the expectation more on the applicants to look through the placement bulletin?
I mean, it can be both. We reach out to people, but we always welcome personal letters that are sent to the school that indicate you notice what we need, our curricular need, and that would be a great fit for you, and the school's a great fit, and the city's a great fit. Those letters are fine, but we're mainly doing our own search through the FAR forms or from people that we're informed about through other faculty members.
For clinical, I think there's definitely some sort of maneuvering and networking that goes on outside of the formal FARS process. So I think it's not beyond the realm to reach out to an institution or perhaps to someone you might know who you think knows someone. So there could be some of that, but by and large, if someone's soliciting applications in a formal way, I think there is a sense that they then appreciate the space to process those applications in a sort of fair and diplomatic way. So a little bit of reaching out, but also, unfortunately, a lot of waiting.
I would add that one of the instances where I would recommend reaching out is if you are a candidate who is geographically limited. So and that's something to think very deeply and seriously about. It's not a matter of preference, it's really a matter of really unable to move outside of a certain area. If that's the situation that you're in, then I do think it makes sense to reach out to the schools that you would consider, and that you may find those schools in the placement bulletin. But I would be cautious about indicating geographic restrictions. All right, Keely, next up.
Sure. Should you specially apply to as many jobs as possible, or only specially apply to the ones who are the best fit? That is, to maximize the likelihood of calls or invites for interviews at the AALS.
It's a tough question. I mean, it's not really a dilemma. You want to apply to as many as you can. You never know who's going to take you. The problem becomes, it really only becomes a problem if you get so many requests to come back that you can't fit everybody in. And if you filled your dance card at the beginning with people that are low on your interest poll, and then people come back to you later that you like more, you're going to have to do some reshuffling. So I would apply to every school that you would legitimately consider taking an offer at. And, just like with colleges, you want some fallbacks, you want some breaches and so forth. And because you never know also who really is going to light your fire during the interview. There are a lot of people who go into an interview with a school not sure about it, but the people they meet really excite them, and the direction the school's going, what they learn about the school really excites them. So, it's a two-way learning process. Remember, they're learning about you, you're learning about them to some degree. And so I would apply broadly.
So I'd really like to hear from our most recent folks about what recommendations they have on this question. Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely say that I was surprised by a few schools at AALS who interviewed me who I didn't think or didn't know that much about before coming in. And after, even after you do some research on the school and the environment, and you go through, the website and the people there, you will still be surprised by how wonderful some people are and how good of a fit you might be in a different school. So I would just keep an open mind about it. I think that's an important advice.
Professor Ray, anything to add?
No, I think schools do both, reach out and, and sort of respond to letters. It couldn't hurt to send a letter if there's a school that you're particularly interested in. For instance, if there are scholars there whose work you really admire and who, you can say something specific about. I honestly don't know the value of sending like 70 generic kind of cover letters. It's a lot of work, and I don't think that there's much return on the investment, so to speak. So try to do what you can. I think it's a good idea to do some cover letters, but you'll also hear from schools, that maybe that you didn't even know, were looking for someone like you.
And I would just follow up by saying, I think it is important to be open. Faculty hiring across the board, from legal writing to clinical to doctrinal, is rebounding, but it's certainly not as robust as it was 10 years ago. So I think it's really important to be open and not necessarily rule out any school until you've actually had the opportunity. If they are extending the opportunity to meet with you, I think it's worthwhile exploring what opportunities they may have. All right, Keely, next up.
Is it okay to explain that I am looking to commute to the school and stay there about 2 nights a week, but maintain my home location because of my family commitments?
I'll chime in. I would put this kind of in the same category as the earlier questions about, well, honestly, it's in keeping with how many places do I apply, the places that feel like a fit, or, everywhere, or even the question about when do I announce an issue with a spouse. So I answer this in a similar vein, which is no, don't mention it at the screening interview, both because it's early days. I think obviously you have to do your own internal investigation about how static the arrangement with your family is, but you might find out as you're progressing through the interview process that there's a level of problem solving you can engage in with the school that actually relaxes, which assists you and your needs with vis-a-vis your family change. Or, as you get further along, and particularly at an offer stage, their receptiveness to your basically forecasting limitations, it would be received way differently down the line than it would at a screening interview. Obviously, you need to balance that, though, with never wanting to be entirely so disingenuous or dishonest about what's possible for you, because I've heard it sort of described that applying for a job is like in academia is a little bit like running a campaign. So there is a certain buzz that you want to create around you and around your name. And so you have to be careful about not being misleading, but I think you can also hold some of your cards until you're in a better and more powerful position to discuss them. That would be my advice.
I would agree that you don't have to reveal this information before a screening interview. I probably would lean towards you revealing it before they invest the time bringing you back to the faculty. It is something that might be really important for them to know before they spend the time, money, energy, a slot on you. And fairness might dictate that you reveal that before they make the final decision about bringing you back. So it may be something that should go into a call, should be mentioned in a call if they extend a callback interview. At that point, they are very interested in you already and may be willing to go the next step, but it's probably something in fairness they should know at that stage.
So one of the reasons that we are doing this is to really bring some transparency to the process. And so what I'm going to offer is in that spirit of transparency. So I was the Dean of Faculty, and the Dean of Faculty at my school is responsible for scheduling classes and for committees. And I would say if I were confronted with a candidate who said that they were going to be on my campus for 2 days, that would be a deal killer for me. Particularly a junior faculty member. I think it's important that you be part of the community. My expectation would be that you would be beyond your teaching, that you're going to be a good, you're going to contribute to the intellectual life of the law school, to this, that you're going to be an active and engaged committee member. The prospect of your being around on campus for only 2 days of the week would not be one that I would welcome as a faculty member or as an administrator. So again, offering that in the spirit of complete honesty. Okay, next question.
Did you make any mistakes and how did you handle it? What might you advise to avoid the mistake or recover from it if we make a similar mistake?
Again, I turn to my most recent people who have been through the interview process. Any regrets?
So it's not a regret, but it's a mistake that I think I've made, but actually corrected it and got a call back. So it worked.
Okay.
During one of my interviews, it was one of the first ones, I started talking about an idea I had, but I really didn't finish my point. And after getting out of the room, I was like, oh, I started something, but I really didn't finish talking about. And what I did is that after the interviews, after the day was over, or I think maybe the second day, I wrote a thank you note to the committee chair. And I told them, well, I don't know if you remember, but I did talk about this and that, and I maybe didn't finish what I was trying to say. This is what I was trying to say. And he responded very fondly to it, and I was actually got a call back from that place. So just so you know, like if you go out of an interview room and you think to yourself, well, I should have said something else, or I didn't finish talking about something, or didn't make myself clear enough, know that you can fix it in an email later. Make sure that the email is sent, after the day is over and people had some rest, not in the middle of the day.
The next question is, what is something that helps you to stand out as a candidate that you recommend? And I'm just going to combine this other question. Is there anything in particular that you should avoid saying in an interview?
This is going to be kind of a classic law school answer, which is that it just depends. I think that your goal is really to convey who you are in terms of your scholarly interests, your teaching interests, your enthusiasm for the school and for entering the academy. So it's all of those things will vary school to school. And so I think what you want to be is your authentic self.
I would agree with that. I think just what it triggered in my mind, the deal breaker in my head a lot of times, and this was more an issue 10 years ago than it is now when so many people have apps and are truly interested in teaching, would be a candidate who made clear either at the interview or earlier in a FAR form, it was pretty clear that they viewed their retirement is going into teaching in essence. They viewed it as, well, you know, practice has been so much work and stressful, I want to do something less time consuming. Any attitude like that to me was, you know, to tie into the last question, a real mistake that would be hard to rectify during the interview process. You know, you have to remember everybody's there. All the interviewers are there because, one, they love what they're doing. That's why they were picked for the committee. That's why they agree to sit on the committee, which is very time intensive. And two, they love their schools. So, you know, you have to have that in mind when you're interviewing. You don't want to insult their school. You don't want to insult teaching. You don't want to minimize what they're doing, what they've devoted their lives to, what they think is a critically important job and a wonderful job in any way. And hopefully you don't have those feelings because that would not make you a great candidate for a teaching position.
This is a little bit, I hope this isn't sort of redundant to what Professor Strauss has just offered, but and it may be an issue that's not quite as forward for folks who are just entering, but it's also to be thoughtful about describing the experience you're leaving. So not just that, you know, oh, you know, I'm hoping for the sweet ride that is academia, which certainly would, A, it's not true, and B, would not be well received, but also to not sort of bash where you've just been. And it's okay to have critique of where you've been and what it's taught you about what you need as a professional or what you hope for to grow. But to, if it's something that's, just be on top of your own hostility about a former employer, be on top of your own angst about a current employer or a current employment situation. This is particularly true if you're making a parallel move, because you wouldn't want to be heard to be speaking in a disparaging way about the student body or the administration at one, you know, law school as you're applying for a job at another law school. It's just not going to be well received. So I will be clear, that is not a mistake I made, but it has been something I've seen a little bit and heard a little bit, heard my colleagues react to very strongly with candidates who've come through it at various stages and institutions.
All right, thank you. I think we have about 10 minutes left, so Keely, if we could move on.
Sure. Does anyone have advice about screening interviews done by Skype that might differ from the advice you've already given about in-person interviews at the AALS?
So either Professor Dorfman or Professor Ray, did you have Skype interviews last year? Or Claire, Professor Donahue, did any of you have Skype interviews?
I did not, I'm sorry, but my advice for this type of interview is to really make sure that you are engaged and that you look at the camera straight up. Yeah, but I did not have any Skype interviews.
I did do screening interviews. And for me, I think I was telling the group when we were all meeting one another the other day that for me, they were really anxiety provoking because I can be a bit of a Luddite. And different schools may be forwarding you invitations to use a technology that you haven't used before, whether it's Skype, whether it's Zoom. So my advice what worked for me, for someone for whom that was anxiety provoking, is making sure I just had opportunities to practice that. And everything from sort of familiarizing myself with how is my camera working, is my microphone on, things like that. Also, and then as Professor Dorfman says, practicing a little bit, being on a screen in that way. It can be very distracting, seeing yourself in this sort of small screen as you're engaging with your audience. I also say it can be very hard potentially to remember who you have met. I had this experience when I came for a flyout that it was hard to see who everyone was in the room because the camera was sort of distorting it and some people were sitting in literal shadow. So I was glad that I had taken careful notes about who was in the room, made almost like an attendance list. And then in some ways wish I'd done a better job of reviewing that attendance list before coming for a flyout, because there's nothing worse than sort of saying nice to meet you. Thankfully this didn't happen, but nice to meet you to someone who you was actually participating in your screening interview. That's, I think, a little less likely to happen if you've met in person, and maybe a little more likely to happen if you're kind of on this very distorted screen. And to also in keeping with that, where the audio and the video is not as ideal, it's not as authentic in being in space with people, don't hesitate to say that you can't see someone or you didn't quite catch something, because it's important for you to hear things as accurately as possible and participate as authentically as possible.
All right, thank you. Keely.
So we've got kind of a two-part question here. Do schools generally see it as a negative if your scholarship interests do not necessarily align with your teaching interests? For instance, if you're interviewing for a criminal law teaching position, is it a detriment that your scholarship focuses on a topic other than criminal law? And then I just wanted to follow up, kind of put that into another question. Another professor asked is, should one mention esoteric courses one is passionate about, e.g. law and the Holocaust, but are less likely to be a curricular need of the law school?
I think that it's a potential detriment, but it's a pretty minor one. I mean, we want to make sure that you're engaged in research and have an interesting scholarly agenda, but it doesn't have to track with one of your courses. Hopefully it will over time. I mean, some of that can develop. As you teach a course, you often will end up writing in that, and we recognize that, so that's fine. So what you think you want to write on and what you have been working on won't necessarily, we know it won't necessarily continue in the future. It may be a little odd if you're writing on, say, healthcare and you don't have an interest in teaching in healthcare. So, you may have to explain that, and actually it probably is something that you have to think about why that would be so. But especially because in most schools you'll have at least, you'll have more than one subject matter that you're working in. If your teaching doesn't track all of that, if your scholarship rather doesn't track all of your teaching interests, that's absolutely acceptable. I think it's great to have an interest in an esoteric class, so long as you recognize, and perhaps should say overtly, you understand that this wouldn't be something you could teach initially, but you'd love to teach eventually a course in law on the Holocaust. What they're looking for is your willingness to be a good player and understand that when the school is a curricular need, you're happy to fill that. Most schools would be happy to accommodate you in your esoteric interest, especially somewhere down the line.
Okay, I'm just going to jump into the next question. We got about 4 minutes left. My core teaching area is property. I've never taught the class. Should I be prepared to do a job talk at the screening interview? Will interviewers ask specific legal questions? Should I have a syllabi?
I'll start with that. I'll give my view on that. Absolutely not necessary to have a syllabus at all for a course like that. And you probably won't, I can't imagine, I've never been in an interview where we've asked a legal question about a course that someone plans to teach in. And I think you can easily deflect it if there's a legal question that you aren't prepared for with some, obviously I have, and plan to do a lot of work in this material to prepare for the first class. It's hard to imagine that would be how they would keep testing you. I do think they may ask, have you thought about how you teach the course? And I think that's legitimate, that you show and indicate, how you plan to teach it, i.e., do you see this as a course that would just be doctrinal? Do you plan to bring in issues of race and property and equality in property, how property relates to other subject matters, areas, and so forth? Those would be absolutely interesting and important things for you to think about in advance, but not specific legal questions like, what's the rule on perpetuities and so forth.
Any of our junior faculty want to contribute here? Professor Ray?
Yeah, sorry. I'll just say something quick. I think I did get questions asking me how I would approach a certain class. And it's a broad question, and I don't know if that was the exact phrasing, but they might be interested in kind of your thoughts, especially if it's a class that hasn't been taught for very long. I mean, I'm talking about legislation and regulation. In my specific instance, it's a relatively recent addition. And, some folks interviewing you didn't have that class when they were in law school. So they might be interested in, what would be your plan? How would you organize it? That kind of thing.
I do want to, part of the question was that I want to address is whether you expect to do a job talk at the initial screening interview. Absolutely not. You will be expected to talk about what your job talk might be about, and you should have a short, succinct response to that. But nobody's going to expect you at this stage to present your job talk. You only have 30 minutes. So that's something that will come later at the callback.
We're talking about job talks. We did get another question about what is your thought on using PowerPoint for the job talk during a callback?
So I did use a PowerPoint in my job talk, and I think it's recommended. I would say that it really depends on your topic. I would, if you do want to use a PowerPoint, I would not use something that has a lot of words or a lot of narrative in your PowerPoint. And I would just make sure that it actually fits with the rationale behind the research and it will serve a purpose. For example, if you're showing some graphs, I would use a PowerPoint for that.
And so I'm actually going to use that as an opportunity to segue to the end of our session. We will be having a second webinar on the callback interview in mid-October. And so we will be sending you notices about that. And again, we will compile another 4 or so presenters to answer your questions specifically about that. We do have currently on the website a recording of a mock job talk and a debrief about that job talk. So I recommend that to you. Have a look at the resources that we have at teach.aals.org. There's a plethora of information there. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the presenters and to the terrific staff at the AALS for putting this all together. If you do attend the faculty recruitment conference in October, we will have another hour-long session, candidates workshop, where you will be able to ask as many questions, any last-minute questions that you may have before you start interviewing. Additionally, we will send you a link to this webinar, and we will post it on the website. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you all in October.